Hi, this is a support video for Unit 1, Concept 12. This is the question that asks you to give a short definition of each of the following research designs. Those are longitudinal, cross-sectional, and sequential. Okay, I'm going to use this guide to guide our thinking. Oops. Let me get a little more centered there for y'all. Okay, so with a longitudinal study, we're looking at a study that examines changes within an individual over a long period of time. The amount of time will vary, but it needs to be over a several year at least period in order typically to be considered longitudinal. One of the most famous longitudinal studies in child development is a study that looked at pre-K, the impact of pre-K for education on low-income students. And it actually followed a control group and a group that received high-quality early education and looked at factors like employment, education, actually whether the kids ended up in jail or not, if they used drugs or not. And it's been running, and they've just recently updated it, and it actually had a 45-year update. And so they've done a 5, a 10, basically every 5 years, up until the most recent 45-year update. And so that is the longitudinal. So they go back to those same kids that were 4 in the program or in the control group, and they look at all these questions and the impact to try to examine, see if there's a trend on the impact of early care. By the way, most recently they found that there was up until about the age of 30, and then they kind of evened out. So why do we do longitudinal? Well, it can really look at development throughout the lifespan because it can show the impact over a longer period of time. They're typically decent population size, participant size, several hundred of each. Now, what is the disadvantage to that? Well, as you can imagine, to do a study like this is very expensive because it's expensive to start up, and you've got to follow up on these people and where they're at and what they're doing. And these participants went from childhood to adults, and so when they became their own adult, they could choose whether to remain in the study or not. And so there's some loss in participation as well. It takes time. So you might not be publishing for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, or even establishing any type of results for that many years. You lose, so participant attrition is the next disadvantage. Over time, you lose participants, you lose track of them, they die, they decide they don't want to participate anymore, or they just can't be found. You know, some of them end up in jail, and jail is a whole different, prisoners is a whole different type of population and requires a whole different set of requirements and permissions and things like that. So we have a lot of disadvantages and advantages to a longitudinal study. The further away you get from the intervention that occurred, the less possibility of making actual practice changes, making people remember it, making it apply as people will come back and say, hey, well, look, that might have been great pre-K teaching for the time, but you know, when we're talking quality pre-K. Okay, sorry, this got kind of pushed over here. Right here, I'm gonna move this way. So the next type of study we have is cross-sectional, and with a cross-sectional study, we're going to examine changes between participants of different ages at the same point in time. That means our individuals or groups of individuals are different ages, and they are observed for shorter periods of time. And the change that we're seeing, or what we are looking at, is actually an inferred change, not an actually observed change. It's kind of like we're going to check in with them throughout. So you can't actually say this change occurred in this pace, because you're not observing them the whole time or taking it in information. And you can't really get that cohort effect that you can have in the longitudinal study because you're looking at that group over a very long period of time. Now you can also have a mixture of these two. We call it sequential, some call it mixed longitudinal, and that basically takes a combo approach, and it's going to examine the changes within the individual over time. It's also going to examine changes between the participants at different ages at the same point in time. And so there's going to be this point in time when we're going to look at everybody. So we're going to be seeing one person's growth and the group's growth and all of that. It can bring back that cohort kind of aspect that can be examined. It is very expensive. It takes a lot of tracking, but it does lead into findings that can actually get applied as the participants are growing and changing and placed into practice. And so those findings might be a little more applicable than looking back and saying, well, back in the 1990s we should have done this, but now it's 2000 and we know this information, and so we are with that sequential. You might be able to do a little more application. When we take a look at our textbook, move over here. Okay. It has some fairly good diagrams here of how we're looking, how the different research methods go. And so this kind of gives you the idea. So you have child A at 2, child A at 2 years old, child A at 4 years old, and it's looking across that group, and they're going to be looking at each child and the changes in impact. Perry Preschool Project was actually the one that I was discussing that just had its 45th findings anniversary. Then when you're looking at that cross-sectional, you're looking at the 2-year-olds. So in 2004, you're looking at cohort A, B, and C, and 2-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 8-year-olds, and what's going on with them in regards to a certain topic. So it's being more brief. And then sequential, you can kind of see the combo where cohort B and C wasn't even alive in 2002, but we had A and they were 2, and then we took and did the yellow is the practice. So we looked at 2-year-olds and we decided to do something, and we put that into practice with our cohort B at age 2, and then we learned a little more, and we were able to put that into practice for cohort C at age 2. And so we were making adaptations, but we were still studying the concept over time. And we still have our cohorts going straight across, but in essence, the earlier cohorts are impacting the later ones. Very expensive, very time consuming. You would have a larger, probably, team completing a project such as this, because you're going to have extensive sampling, measuring, and data collection involved in sequential research. These are just 3 types. Most research today, I would say, is not in such long terms. A lot of it would be more of our cross-sectional nature, where it's looking at a very specific place and time for different types of groups. And so what is the impact of what is the impact of providing parents of infants born in the year 2000 with a set of books and on literacy. And so you're gonna take a look at their literacy scores as they grow and change and all of that. So there's actually studies that look at how many words you hear before a certain age and how that impacts your cognitive linguistic development. So things like that. This stuff can be confusing, so let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next concept.